A couple of really important topics that have hit the headlines over the past week, and I wanted to hit them straight on the head as quickly as we could on TheInformer. And I've reached out to the member of Wills, the federal member for Wills. His name is Peter Khalil. Peter, welcome to TheInformer.
Thanks for having me, George.
Two very important topics: the lockdown on the Housing Commission towers right across North Melbourne and Flemington, and the associated hype and noise that came out of that, and some of the commentary, which really astonished me. I thought it was racist. I couldn't believe some of the antics that were going on. And then the attack on multiculturalism. And I mean, let's just go one step at a time. What did you make of some of the commentary that emerged last week?
Well, I mean, I was quite disturbed, George. I think maybe similar to you, concerned, frustrated, somewhat angry. I grew up in a housing commission, like many migrants did when they first came to this country. They got a start at a housing commission. They got affordable housing, and it was the baseline to give you that equality of opportunity. So, it wasn't easy, but you got, public housing, access to healthcare, access to education, the kind of basic elements that allowed you, that leveled the playing field and allowed our families to work hard and based on merit and hard work and dedication to achieve and contribute back to society. And there are millions of Australians who've gone through that process as migrants, many socio-economically disadvantaged Australians who've had the opportunity of public housing. So I've always been a defender of more public housing funding. I've been arguing this before this whole situation in the last couple of weeks, for more resources for public housing, because the stock has actually declined over the last couple of decades. And what's interesting, you note the commentary around the people in public housing, whether it's from the far right saying they're all alcoholics and drug dealers, through to people who are anti-migrant, attacking multiculturalism, saying they're doing the wrong thing. Let's just be very clear here. The people in the housing estates in North Melbourne and Flemington are frontline workers. They work hard. Many of them, work as healthcare workers or aged care workers or social workers.
Yeah, all the service industries. All the service industries.
Yep. They deliver the food. They drive the trucks. They do all these types of jobs. Some are educated or getting a really good education to go through. They're putting food on the table for themselves and their family, and they're trying to build a better life. And that housing, that public housing, gives them that opportunity, because they might come from a socio-economically disadvantaged background or a new and emerging migrant background. And because they are in high-density estates, they have been doubly disadvantaged, because obviously in a pandemic, there's a higher risk when you have concentrated populations. But the way they have been, the commentary, the way they were treated, I had huge question marks around that. When 48 hours of notice was given to the rest of Melbourne, if you like, before that stage 3 lockdown came in a couple of days ago. And guess what all the affluent people did out in the eastern suburbs?
Change their addresses.
Their BMWs, they packed their Range Rovers, their Chardonnay and their Caviar and the Eskies, and thousands of them flew down the highway to the peninsula or to their coastal villas. So I'm asking the question, like, I understand the strong health response that the state government has to put in place, but, there's some pertinent and legitimate questions to be asked about how people in public housing are treated. And why was there this kind of, a police presence? I mean, at the time, I was talking about the need for health workers, social workers, mental health support, the food and the medication, deliveries and so on and so forth. And, I can't understand. Well, I can understand. That's not true, George. There is a real lack of understanding of people that live in housing commissions. They are almost invisible in many respects. And what has happened in the last couple of weeks has shone a light on that disadvantage and made the invisible visible. It's rendered it visible for a moment. And we're all talking about it now. And I think it's a good opportunity to talk about not just the immediate impact of that hard lockdown, but what about the resources that federal and state and local governments have to put into public housing, and the way that you treat those people with dignity, or you should treat them with dignity and respect.
It's well put, and I'm glad you've come out so strongly and made your comments. I've watched greater parts of Melbourne take some of those Housing Commission properties and renovate them as best they can and give them a new lease of life. And they've come up strong, especially in South Melbourne, towers that you know very well.
Yep.
There's a beautiful parkland around them. There's been an awful lot of manicuring of lawns and giving people, again, something to feel proud of. Now, I remember in those early days when you were there, you're right in the middle of the city almost. You've got parkland around you, but you've got about 100 or so different communities. And although those housing commissions, as you say, take a toll, they also fill you with a bit of steel as well. You get to learn how to cope with living side by side with people who are different to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, the resilience that you learn growing up in a housing commission, but also the sense of community. People knew each other, they engaged with each other across different cultural backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. There was a lot of Greek Australians, a lot of Italian, a lot of, our community, the Egyptian Australians. There was a lot of new migrants that came in the 70s. We were there in the 70s and early 80s, and it wasn't very trendy back then in the inner city, that part of the inner city, but the sense of community was certainly there. Because people were working class, they were working hard, they wanted to have a better life for themselves and their children, and you learnt resilience. There were issues. Don't get me wrong. You're on your bike and you're dodging syringes in the car park or in the garage or whatever.
There's nowhere to hide.
And there was and there was crime, and then there were issues. There's no doubt about that. So it does teach you resilience. But the thing that concerns me, George, apart from that immediate issue that we were just discussing on the hard lockdown, is that over the last several decades, as a percentage of all housing, public housing stock has declined. There was a peak during the Hawke Keating years in the early 90s. It peaked at about 5.5–6% of total housing stock. Since then, it has declined. And I'm saying this is not a particularly partisan point. I say all governments of all political persuasions have dropped the ball on this. And what I mean by dropping the ball is that we've still had migration to this country. You still have these new and emerging migrant groups coming. What you want to do, what public housing does, it gives those people who are starting out, who are going to be socioeconomically in a demographic that is not affluent by very nature of their status, it gives them an opportunity to build a life here. It adds to social cohesion. It makes multiculturalism actually work because there's the provision of that affordable housing for those people to get a good start. When we talk about equality of opportunity, that's what it means. Levelling the playing field. Access to education is the other really major part of that, so that it opens the doors to these new and emerging migrant groups to really fulfill their potential and make that contribution to society. And so many people who've come from that background have made an enormous contribution to Australian society. So I'm concerned going into this COVID period, obviously, and potentially the post-COVID period, hopefully, we should be, and I'm going to be advocating in my position as a Member of Parliament, that issue of public housing and social housing, affordable housing, is put front and centre on the National Cabinet agenda in the economic recovery phase, because not only is there already a very large waiting list for public housing even before COVID-19, it's going to grow as you see people struggle with their businesses collapsing, or people who are really struggling and losing their jobs. There's going to be a need for the state to provide a baseline. If they don't do that, George, you will see a real massive impact on social cohesion and the breakdown of some of these elements of society. When we're talking big picture here, public housing plays actually a critical role.
Yeah, well said, well spoken, and keep fighting, Peter. We've had the member for Wills, the federal member for Wills, on The Informer, Peter Khalil. I want to catch up with you again so we can talk about multiculturalism, and something else that's very close to my heart is the SBS still answering its charter?
I'd love to talk to you about that, George.
We'll do that another time. Thank you very much,
do
Captain.
that one.
All the best.